Hello and welcome. You're watching News Central Television. I am Judith TB. Here are the stories making headlines just beyond the continent. And we begin with the U.S.-China tariff war, where President Donald Trump says Chinese-made smartphones and other electronics will not be exempt from tariffs, adding they are simply moving into a different levy bucket. Now, European stock markets bounced up on Monday morning after Friday's official announcement that some of these products would escape levies of up to 145%. China has called on Donald Trump to completely cancel his tariffs regime and return to the right path of mutual respect. However, U.S. officials said that products would be subject to semiconductor tariff instead, with Trump expected to reveal more details later. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the new levy would be in addition to a host of global tariffs the U.S. imposed earlier this month. They paused for 90 days.
Right, but the tariffs will be in place in the not distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things. And that'll take place in the very near future. And it'll happen very fast. It'll all happen very fast.
Do you know what rate the semiconductor tariff?
I'm going to be announcing it over the next week. Can you?
And joining us now to discuss this is a fintech and AI policy expert, as well as founder of the Cynical Cloud. And we have Chase Inagbedion. He joins us from Oklahoma in the United States. Chase, many thanks for doing this with us. Let's just get started. What impact could this have on countries that rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing and assembly?
It does a lot, and thank you for having me on the show. We just returned back from the Google Cloud Nest event in Las Vegas, where issues around policies and tariff were points of discussions. You know, tariff imposition will create a domino effect. Like recently in February, Trump praised Apple's $500 billion reinvestment pledge and his promise to create 20,000 jobs. So for that move, which is reminiscent of his $350 billion commitment during Trump's first time, when iPhones were temporarily exempt from China's tariffs. So the question isn't just about trade, it's about the future of consumer access, digital infrastructure, and even AI-powered economics. So tariff imposition creates a domino effect, and countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, which rely on China for component assembly. Like I was joking with a friend, I remember those days we talk about the UK-US phones from our own country here in Nigeria around the computer village. But this would also see supply delays, contract volatility, increased input costs. Like for regions like West Africa that are scaling digital public infrastructure, this can delay everything from EID system to fintech onboarding tools, which need cheap smartphones and reliable chipsets.
And you make a very valid point there. But how might the shifting of tariffs to target the entire electronic supply chain affect global tech companies and consumers?
It could stall innovation cycles. Companies like Apple, who earn temporary favor from Trump, like I mentioned, with a major job and infrastructure pledge, may again seek to offset costs by localizing more assembly. But not all tech players can afford to pivot that fast. For startups and small fintech firms, cost spikes in servers, chips. NVIDIA made some recent declarations about some chips. Recently, consumer devices means delayed launches, higher customer acquisition costs, and thinner margins. Consumers feel it too with price hikes on devices which are used for everyday financial assets. As we saw at Google Cloud Nest, AI adoption and infrastructure depends on accessible hardware. If tariff affect this hardware cost, this could slow the pace of fintech adoption in developing countries like Nigeria, widen the digital dive, and after product like AI-driven banking tools and mobile lending. So this is something that we should take seriously.
Given Trump's claim of no exemptions and the shifting of products into different tariff buckets, how can investors and businesses navigate this uncertain times that we live in?
So 3 words I always advise would be them to diversify, hedge, adapt. Investors should track exposure by geographic and sector. It should not just be a focus on one part countries. Like I mentioned, the UK used phones in the day, so you're looking at other European countries. Businesses should shorten their supply chains. They should diversify their sourcing. They should invest in predictive trade analytics. For example, at Sanico.cloud, we use AI to stimulate policy risk scenarios. So tools like that are essential now, not just for hedge funds, but even for SMEs seeking to de-risk procurement or investment strategies. And I think this should also be on one of the burner topics for the Minister of Finance, also from our home country, Nigeria, the CBN governor, when they're speaking at the spring meetings that will be happening at the World Bank next week.
Also, Chase, know that I was sending you an invoice for that marketing that you did. But Chase, thank you for doing this with us. We appreciate you for coming. Chase and Dion, just giving us a bit of insight following more tariff and exemptions for China. In the meantime, El Salvador's President Tayyip Bukele says he would not return a man who the Trump administration admits was mistakenly deported to the Central American country as part of a controversial U.S. migration crackdown. The president said this on Monday at a meeting in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump. The Trump administration has been ordered by a court to facilitate the man's return after he was deported without due process. The administration has claimed Abrigo Garcia, a Maryland father, is a member of the MS-13 gang. Meanwhile, his lawyers have denied the claim.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
Preposterous indeed. Let's talk about the return of the Democrats in the United States after election defeat in the face of Donald Trump's return to the White House. One of the loudest voices of resistance is coming from a familiar figure, and that's Senator Bernie Sanders. And he's back in the spotlight, launching a national campaign of rallies under the banner of fighting oligarchy. Let's take a look at that report.
In Los Angeles, more than 36,000 supporters flooded Gloria Molina Grand Park for what has become Sanders' biggest rally yet. Joined on stage by musicians, Labour leaders and fellow progressives, Sanders called out what he described as a growing threat of authoritarianism in the United States.
We're living in a moment with a president who has no understanding or respect for the Constitution of the United States. And let us make no doubt about it, moving us rapidly toward an authoritarian form of society. And Mr. Trump, we ain't going there.
Sharing the stage was Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who echoed Sanders' message of class solidarity and called on Americans to rise above partisan divisions.
We need a Democratic Party that fights harder for us too. And that means our communities, all of us coming together, choosing and voting for Democrats and elected officials who know how to stand for the working class.
The rally, which some dubbed Bernie-Chella, featured a performance by Neil Young and drew comparisons to a music festival, blending politics with grassroots energy. Mentions of billionaire Elon Musk, whom Sanders frames as symbolic of unchecked wealth and politics, drew loud boos from the crowd. Sanders, now 83, has rolled out a presidential bid in 2028, but he's positioning rising progressive stars like Ocasio-Cortez for leadership roles. He insists the movement isn't about party labels, but about class and economic fairness. as the Democratic Party struggles to define itself post-election. Sanders' rallies are striking a chord with Americans looking for bold opposition to Donald Trump's policies. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagan.
And let's talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, shall we? As local officials said, 2 ballistic missiles struck the heart of the Ukrainian city of Sumy at around 10:30 a.m. local time as people gathered to celebrate Palm Sunday. Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed rescue efforts are ongoing, and he said dozens had been killed in the double missile attack. For News Central, Ayo Olugbesen has more.
The death toll in a Russian missile strike on the Ukrainian city of Sumy has risen to 31, including 2 children. Kyiv State Emergency Service disclosed that 84 people were also injured, including 10 children. Sumy lies close to the Russian border and has been under increasing pressure since Moscow pushed back much of Ukraine's troops from its Kursk region across the border. Images showed burnt-out cars and plumes of smoke rising into the air. Sumy lies some 50 kilometers from the border. Meanwhile, Kyiv has warned for weeks that Moscow could mount an offensive on Sumy. Last month, Russia claimed the capture of a village in the Sumy region for the first time since the early days of its 2022 invasion. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky called on allies to put strong pressure on Russia to end its war against Ukraine after airstrike. He said Russia will continue to drag out this war as it's been 2 months since Putin ignored America's proposal for a full and unconditional ceasefire. Zelensky added that unfortunately, Moscow are confident that they can afford to keep killing, whereas Ukraine needs to act to change the situation.
Meanwhile, Russia says its missiles hit a meeting of Ukrainian army commanders in Sumy, accusing Ukraine of using civilians as a human shield after Kyiv said the Sunday attack killed at least 34 people in one of the deadliest strikes of the entire war. Russia's attack drew condemnation and accusations of war crimes from leaders around the world, though U.S. President Donald Trump, who is pushing for a ceasefire, called it a horrible thing and suggested that Russia had made a mistake. Commenting on the strike for the first time after more than 24 hours, Russia's defense ministry said its army launched 2 ballistic missiles at the place of a meeting of command staff, claiming that it had killed 60 Ukrainian soldiers. The Kremlin rejected that its army had targeted civilians or that there had been any kind of mistake.
У нас есть факты о том, кто находился на том объекте, который был поражен в Сумах. Там была очередная сходка украинских военачальников со своими западными коллегами, которые то ли под видом наемников, то ли не знаю под видом кого, но военнослужащие стран НАТО находятся там, все это знают. Ну, во-первых, международное гуманитарное право категорически запрещает размещать военные объекты на территории объектов гражданских.
In the meantime, 2 Chinese nationals who were captured fighting with Russian forces in the eastern Donetsk region of Ukraine spoke at a press conference in Kyiv to a full room of journalists alongside armed Ukrainian soldiers. The 2 prisoners of war were escorted into the room in handcuffs. 33-year-old Wang Guachong used his compatriots he urged his compatriots, not to join the war and said Russia had told them lies. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had claimed that hundreds of Chinese nationals were fighting at the Ukraine front line alongside Russian troops. The Kremlin denied the claim, while Beijing warned parties to the conflict against making irresponsible remarks.
中国可以和俄罗斯乌克兰之间把我们进行交换，换回中国。
对于想参加这个对乌克兰的战争的中国同胞，我想说的是，不要参与这场战争。俄罗斯给予我们的都是谎言，都是假的。俄罗斯没有他说的那么强大，乌克兰也没有他说的那么弱小。 当真正参与战争的那一刻，到了交火的那一刻，你会发现所有的一切都是谎言。
Let's go on a short break, shall we? When we return, Hamas promises to free hostages if end to Gaza war is guaranteed. We have the details of this and more just after this break. Stay with us. Hey, welcome back. A senior Hamas official says the Palestinian group is prepared to release all Israeli hostages in exchange for a serious prisoner swap and guarantees that Israel will end the war in Gaza. Hamas left Cairo on Monday after negotiations with mediators from Egypt and Qatar, two nations working alongside the United States to broker a ceasefire in the besieged territory. However, he accused Israel of obstructing progress towards a ceasefire. Meanwhile, some displaced Gazians expressed hope that the ceasefire deal will succeed this time, lamenting that the people of Gaza are tired and cannot bear any more than this.
يضغطوا لإنهاء الحرب، يضغطوا لأنه كم الشهداء، كم الدمار، كم العذاب النفسي والخوف اللي نحن موجودين فيه وعايشين فيه من بداية الحرب لحد الآن سنة ونص، هاي مش يوم ومش يومين، والتشرد والتجويع.
يضغط على الأطراف كلها، يضغط على كل الأطراف. الوسطاء لهم دور فعال واحنا بنشكرهم عليه، اول واخيرا احنا بنشكرهم عليه، بس احنا بدنا زياده مجهود منكم، زياده ضغط على الاطراف، خليها يعني توصلونا لمرحله النهايه يا رجل، بدنا نصل لما احنا بنستنى مرحله النهايه، متى انا بحكي لهم متى مرحله النهايه؟
والله احنا بنتامل خير، بنتامل من المفوضين والوسطاء مصر وقطر والولايات المتحدة انهم يضغطوا باتجاه انه يعني حل القضية الفلسطينية كاملة وادخال مساعدات ووقف الحرب نهائيا ونبدا في مرحلة الإعمار.
والله بنتأمل انها تنجح المفاوضات، وهي في ضغوطات مصرية وضغوطات قطرية، بنتأمل ان شاء الله ان المرة هذه تنجح، لانه عن جد احنا الشعب الغزاوي تعب كثير ومش قادر يتحمل أكثر من هيك، كثير عانينا، معاناة نفسية ومعاناة جسدية ومعاناة كل حاجة، تعبنا عن جد تعبنا.
Hungarian lawmakers on Monday overwhelmingly backed constitutional changes targeting the country's LGBTQ community and dual nationals. This is the latest step to threaten longtime nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orban's self-styled illiberal brand of democracy. Since his return to power in 2010, Hungary's leader has widely restricted the rights of the LGBTQ community, the media, courts, and academia. In mid-March, he vowed to undertake an Easter cleanup against his domestic opponents he has called stink bugs.
Igen szavazatra szükséges. Kérdezem a tisztelt országgyűlést, elfogadja-e a törvényt?
Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro will face a very delicate and long post-surgery period that will keep him at least 2 weeks in hospital. This was disclosed by the former president's doctors following a successful abdominal operation. The former president underwent marathon surgery after being hospitalized for an intestinal obstruction linked to a 2018 stabbing attack. The far-right former leader had said on Saturday on X that his latest problem was a consequence of the multiple surgeries that he needed to undergo after the attack in 2018.
Pós-operatório muito delicado e prolongado, tá? Prolongado. Ontem já muitos perguntaram, mas ele vai ter alta nessa próxima semana? Não há previsão, né? Porque a gente sabe que o importante é que ele saia 100% recuperado.
Nós temos essa primeira fase do pós-operatório, que são essas primeiras 48 horas, que são bastante críticas em função. Depois dessas primeiras 48 horas, a gente entra numa outra fase de pós-operatório, tá? Que é uma fase um pouquinho mais tranquila, mas já antecipo para vocês que não tenham grandes expectativas de uma evolução rápida. A nossa expectativa, correndo tudo dentro do previsto, é que ele fique pelo menos aí 2 semanas.
Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa has secured a decisive victory in the presidential runoff, extending his tenure with a strong mandate to tackle the country's growing cartel violence. With over 90% of the votes counted, Noboa maintained a 12-point lead over his left-wing challenger, Luisa Gonzalez. Final results showed Noboa with 56% of the vote, while Gonzalez followed with 44%, a notable margin, especially after the near deadlock in the first round. And that's all we can take from beyond the continent. Now, do remember that if you see anything out there on the roads, you can send us your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number now showing on the screen. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on social media. We're at News Central TV on all social media platforms. You can always watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, on GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274. Find us on Avo TV, or better yet, just stream us live on YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Judith at TV. Good night.